It all started on an ordinary Tuesday. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, watching my 5-year-old daughter, Lily, race around the yard on her little pink tricycle. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and everything felt perfectly normal. That is, until I noticed the envelope lying on our welcome mat. It wasn't just any envelope. This one had the HOA logo stamped on it, looking official and intimidating, like it could control the very air we breathed. Curious, I tore it open. My eyes scanned the words, and I had to read it twice to make sense of it. Notice of violation. Your daughter's toys obstruct safe community pathways. Immediate action required. I blinked. Lily's tricycle, her little sandbox, and a few scattered dolls were now apparently obstructions. I laughed at first, thinking it was a prank. But the moment I peeked over the fence, I saw Karen, yes, Karen, the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer, standing a few houses down, arms crossed, staring at us like a drill sergeant on a secret mission. I shook my head. This was absurd. Who takes issue with a 5-year-old playing in her yard? I called the HOA office. The receptionist sounded tired, distracted, and not at all concerned. Rules are rules, she said, almost apologetically, before hanging up. I tried to laugh it off with Lily, telling her, "Looks like your tricycle is too dangerous for the HOA." She giggled, oblivious to the storm brewing just across the street. The next day, another letter appeared. This one was more direct. Failure to comply with safety codes may result in enforcement action. Enforcement action. My mind conjured all sorts of scenarios, none of them pleasant. By the third day, I had started noticing Karen's van parked strategically near our curb. She didn't just glance at us anymore. She observed, like a hawk circling its prey. I began to feel a creeping sense of dread. Each time Lily ran outside, Karen would appear within minutes, lurking on the edge of our property. I tried reasoning with her once over the fence. "She's just a child," I said, my voice firm but polite. Karen's response, a dramatic sigh, like I was an imbecile who couldn't comprehend the dangers of a sandbox. "Safety isn't optional," she said, as if she were quoting some sacred HOA scripture. By Friday, it had escalated. I was cooking dinner when I noticed Karen stepping onto our lawn. My heart sank. She was holding one of those bright orange HOA forms, waving it like a weapon. Before I could react, she marched right up to Lily, who had just planted flowers in her miniature garden. "Your child must be removed," Karen declared in a voice so loud the neighbors probably heard it from across the street. I froze. This was no longer about letters or warnings. Karen actually meant it. My mind raced. I tried to intercept her, my voice trembling as I shouted, "No, you can't just, she's 5. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispering, some amused, some horrified. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears. Karen smirked, completely unbothered, and took a step closer to Lily. It was surreal. Part of me wanted to laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation, a woman claiming authority over my 5-year-old's very presence, but the fear was real. My daughter looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide, sensing the tension. I grabbed my phone, dialing my husband in a flurry of panic. "You won't believe what's happening," I whispered urgently. Karen's gaze flicked up at me, and I had the sinking feeling that this confrontation was about to get worse. The suspense hung thick in the air. Would she actually take Lily? Did she think she had the right to do this? I felt frozen, caught between fear and outrage, while the absurdity of it all weighed heavily on my chest. And then, in the midst of all that chaos, I saw her vanish behind her van, presumably dragging paperwork, or worse, closer to our home. My fingers tightened around the phone. I whispered to Lily, "Stay close to me, don't move." I had no idea what Karen would do next, but one thing was certain. Our quiet suburban life had just become a full-blown battle. As I waited, heart hammering, I knew this was only the beginning. Something inside me told me that by the end of today, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I woke up to an uneasy quiet. That false sense of calm didn't last long. As soon as Lily ran out to grab her breakfast cereal from the patio table, I noticed Karen's familiar shadow moving across our lawn. My stomach sank. I hadn't even had my coffee, and already, the day felt like a ticking time bomb. I stepped outside and called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Karen, please just leave us alone, she's 5. Karen didn't even flinch. She stood there, hands on her hips, the orange enforcement clipboard clutched tightly, and said with all the authority of a captain commanding a battleship, "Your daughter is in violation of community safety codes. I'm taking action." "Action? What action?" I asked, my voice shaking but trying to sound rational. My mind raced. Could she actually think she had the right to? Then she moved. Before I could react, Karen reached for Lily. My heart lurched into my throat. Neighbors peeked over their fences, some frozen in shock, some whispering to each other in disbelief. Lily, small and unsteady, looked at me with fear and confusion. "Mommy?" she asked softly. I sprinted forward, pulling Lily close. "No, Karen, you cannot do this. She's my daughter." Karen tilted her head, smirk still firmly in place. "The HOA has rules," she said matter-of-factly. "Your personal feelings do not override community regulations." I stared at her, half in disbelief, half in fury. Was this really happening? Could someone actually try to drag a child out of her own home using HOA authority as justification? My brain flitted between panic and sarcasm. Maybe I should have checked the HOA handbook more carefully. Do they have a section on kidnapping under community safety enforcement? At that moment, a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stepped out of his driveway. Karen, maybe this is going a little far," he said, voice hesitant. Karen shot him a glare that could have frozen water in midair. "Mind your business," she snapped, waving him off like an irritating fly. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands shaking as I held Lily tighter. I fumbled for my phone, calling my husband. His voice, calm and steady as always, answered almost immediately. "What's going on?" he asked. I tried to explain in between panicked breaths, my voice rising as Karen tugged slightly at Lily's arm. She's actually trying to take her," I shouted. My husband's tone didn't waver. "Stay calm, don't do anything rash, I'm on my way." While I waited, I tried reasoning with Karen. "Do you even realize she's a child? This isn't a sandbox violation. This is my daughter." Karen tilted her head, expression almost bored like a cat watching a mouse. "Rules are rules, you were warned. You ignored the letters." I couldn't help it. I laughed nervously, a laugh that came out more like a bark of disbelief. "You're actually arguing that letters about toys give you the right to, kidnap a 5-year-old? Karen's smirk didn't falter. "I am enforcing the law of the community. If you cannot comply, I have no choice." Meanwhile, Lily's small hand clutched mine, her tiny fingers gripping tight. I looked down at her and whispered, "It's okay, honey. Mommy's right here. We're going to be okay." But I wasn't so sure. Karen had that unwavering look, the kind that made you believe she truly thought she was above the law. My neighbors began murmuring, some cautiously stepping closer, unsure if they should intervene. Others simply watched, as if this were some bizarre suburban reality show. And then, just when the tension seemed unbearable, my husband's car pulled up. The sound of sirens, though faint, cut through the thick tension like a blade. Karen's smirk faltered for the first time as he stepped out, uniform crisp, badge shining. My heart leapt. Relief washed over me, but so did a new tension. What would happen next? Karen had been bold enough to drag my daughter halfway across the lawn already. How far would she go before the law finally stepped in? I held Lily close and whispered, "Daddy's here now, you're safe." Karen looked between us and my husband, panic flickering across her face, though she tried desperately to mask it with indignation. The neighborhood stood silent, watching, waiting, and I realized one thing. The quiet little street we thought we knew had turned into a stage for something none of us could have predicted. And that's when I knew, deep down, this battle was far from over. The moment my husband stepped onto the lawn, everything seemed to slow down. Karen froze mid-step, still holding that ridiculous orange clipboard like it could protect her from reality. I could see her trying to calculate her next move, her eyes darting between us, our daughter, and my husband, whose uniform seemed to make the air itself feel heavier. I clutched Lily tightly, whispering, "It's okay, honey, Daddy, here." Her small fingers clung to mine as if she knew, in some instinctive way, that protection had finally arrived. But the tension didn't let go that easily. Karen's smirk had shifted slightly, replaced with a flicker of panic she tried hard not to show. My husband's voice cut through the silence, calm but commanding. "Ma'am, let go of the child." Karen straightened, shoulders back, attempting to regain authority. "I am enforcing community safety codes," she said, trying to sound official. "This child is in violation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to laugh, except there was nothing funny about the fact that she had actually believed she had the right to physically remove our daughter. My mind raced. How had it gotten this far? How could a neighborhood association dare to think they outrank the law? Karen's words faltered when my husband's eyes locked on hers, steady and unyielding. I could almost hear the tension crackling in the air. Around us, neighbors peeked from windows and lawns, some holding their phones, perhaps already imagining social media posts about the spectacle unfolding in front of them. I tried reasoning again, my voice shaking but strong. "She's 5, you're trying to take my daughter from our own home." Karen hesitated for the first time, glancing around as if looking for backup. That's when I noticed the other HOA board members emerging from their houses, whispering to each other, looking panicked. The absurdity of it all was almost surreal. I wanted to scream, laugh, and cry all at once. My husband moved closer, keeping his hand near his side. "Ma'am, this ends now. Let go of the child, or you will face consequences." Karen's eyes widened. For a moment, I thought she might actually comply. Then she straightened, trying to maintain her overbearing composure. "I have the authority to." My husband interrupted, his voice firm and low. "Authority doesn't mean immunity. You are breaking the law, step away." For a split second, the world felt suspended. I held my breath, feeling every second stretch. Karen's face twitched, the slightest hint of doubt crossing her features. She had believed, up until this very moment, that her self-imposed HOA power could somehow dictate real-life consequences. I whispered to Lily, keeping my voice soft, "Daddy, got us. It's okay now." My daughter leaned into me, her small head resting on my chest, and I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. Then, as if the universe had decided the drama needed an audience, Mr. Thompson and a few other neighbors stepped forward, cautious but clearly on our side. One muttered under his breath, "She's crazy if she thinks this will work." Karen's gaze flicked toward them, frustration and panic fighting for dominance across her face. My husband took another step closer, this time placing himself directly between Karen and Lily. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Step away from the child and remain where you are." And then it happened. Karen's confidence finally cracked. She let go of the clipboard and took a step back, eyes darting nervously as if trying to find a loophole, a way to regain control. But there was no loophole. The law had arrived, and with it, a calm authority that she could no longer challenge. Neighbors watched, holding their breath, and I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. Some whispered to each other, others stared wide-eyed. I realized how ridiculous the situation had become, a woman trying to enforce child safety codes on her own neighbors, confronted by a real-life police officer in the middle of an ordinary suburban street. I hugged Lily tighter, still trembling. "It's okay, baby, it's really okay." Karen, however, was not finished. She muttered something about the board, about rules, about authority, but my husband's steady gaze and firm tone stopped her mid-sentence. "Rules don't allow you to drag children out of their homes," he said. "You are under arrest if you do not comply immediately." The realization hit her like a cold wave. Her smirk vanished entirely, replaced with the faintest flicker of panic. The other board members, who had been lingering nervously, now began shuffling around, unsure whether to intervene or flee. The tension reached a new high. I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. The quiet suburban street, the HOA's petty rules, Karen's delusions of authority, it was all coming to a head. And I also knew, deep in my bones, that once my husband took charge, there was no turning back. The scene froze for just a moment in my memory. My husband standing tall, Lily clinging to me, Karen staring at him in disbelief, and the neighbors, witnesses to a suburban drama far stranger than anyone could have imagined. This was only the beginning, and whatever happened next would be unforgettable. My husband's arrival had shifted the entire dynamic, but the tension didn't disappear, it intensified. Karen, still clutching her orange clipboard like it was armor, glared at us with a mix of fury and disbelief. The other HOA board members had begun to appear on the edges of the street, muttering to each other and casting nervous glances in our direction. For a moment, I felt like the entire neighborhood had stopped breathing, watching a suburban showdown unfold in front of our house. I held Lily close, trying to calm her trembling little body. "It's okay, sweetie, Daddy. Here now, you're safe," I whispered. She nodded, eyes wide, peeking up at my husband like he was some kind of superhero come to rescue her. Karen straightened, summoning all the authority she could muster. "You can't this is a community issue. These are rules," she shouted, as if yelling louder could somehow bend reality to her will. My husband didn't flinch. His tone remained calm but firm. "Ma'am, your so-called rules do not allow you to remove a child from her home. Release her immediately or face arrest." Karen's face flickered between indignation and panic. I could see her mind racing, calculating how to escape this humiliation while still clinging to some shred of control. Meanwhile, the rest of the board shuffled nervously behind her, some whispering, others visibly shaking. I tried to speak, my voice rising with urgency. "This is ridiculous. She's a child and you have no right. Step away." But Karen ignored me, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Lily. My heart hammered, and for a terrifying moment, I felt helpless. Then, without warning, my husband moved closer. There was a shift in the air, a subtle change that made Karen pause. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't waving a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone made it clear the game was over. Karen's smirk wavered. She glanced at the other board members as if seeking reassurance or backup. But none came. Mr. Thompson and a few other neighbors had stepped onto their lawns, arms crossed, shaking their heads. Some whispered comments under their breath, adding a layer of public scrutiny that Karen clearly hadn't anticipated. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Every second stretched out, each heartbeat loud and insistent. Karen's hand twitched toward the clipboard again, but my husband's steady gaze stopped her. "Step back," he said. "Now." For the first time, I saw fear cross her features. She muttered something about bylaws, authority, and volunteer duty, but my husband cut her off. "You are breaking the law. Step away from the child immediately." Karen froze, caught between outrage and compliance. Her eyes darted to Lily, then to me, then back to my husband. I could almost hear her thinking, how did this happen? How did my perfect little world of control fall apart in front of all these witnesses? The neighbors were silent, but the tension was electric. I could feel the anticipation building, everyone waiting for the next move. Would Karen comply? Would she escalate? And what about the rest of the board members, lurking in the shadows, unsure whether to intervene or flee? I whispered to Lily again, softly but firmly, "It's okay, Daddy, in charge, you're safe now." She squeezed my hand, her small fingers clutching mine tightly. Then Karen made a small, desperate step backward. My husband didn't move, didn't blink. His calm authority filled the street, and I realized something. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Karen was no longer in control. The board members, sensing her vulnerability, began hesitating, their confidence evaporating. I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with lingering fear. This wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Karen finally dropped the clipboard, hands shaking slightly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Ma'am," my husband said, voice firm, "you will follow my instructions. Step away from the child, remain where you are, and cooperate." Karen looked around, realizing for the first time that she was surrounded, exposed, and entirely outmatched. The board members flinched, glancing at each other, unsure who would be called on next. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh if the fear hadn't been so real. I held Lily tighter, watching Karen's confidence crumble. This suburban street, which had always seemed so calm and predictable, had become the stage for a showdown that none of us would ever forget. Every neighbor who watched would carry this story in their memory for years. And then my husband gave one last warning. "Step away now, or you will be placed under arrest." Karen hesitated. Time seemed to stretch. The street was silent except for the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of a lawnmower in the distance. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she took a slow step back, her smirk gone, replaced by panic, as the first hints of surrender flickered across her face. I realized, in that moment, the next steps were about to unfold, and the chaos we had been anticipating was only just beginning. The moment Karen stepped back, the tension didn't evaporate, it exploded. My husband didn't hesitate. With calm authority, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for attempted unlawful removal of a child. Any further resistance will result in additional charges." For a second, I thought she might try to argue, to claim some imaginary HOA immunity. Instead, her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, words failing her completely. I could see her panic growing, and suddenly the absurdity of the entire situation hit me. Here was a woman who had believed she could remove my 5-year-old from our home, standing in front of a uniformed officer, and realizing she had absolutely no power. The other board members, who had been hovering nervously a few yards away, finally stepped forward, or rather, tried to slink away. Some of them waved their hands helplessly, muttering about bylaws, volunteer duties, and community regulations. One even whispered, "I didn't sign up for arrests," in a tone that made me snort with a mix of disbelief and amusement. I hugged Lily close, whispering, "It's okay, baby, everything's going to be fine." She clung to me, her little head buried against my chest, but I could feel her tiny trembles, the residual fear of the woman who had tried to drag her away just moments ago. My husband moved toward Karen, handcuffs in hand. "Step toward me, please," he said. She froze, but finally, with a hesitant step, she complied. It was surreal, almost cinematic, the way the entire street seemed to hold its breath as the first arrest took place. I glanced around. Neighbors had begun to peek out from windows and lawns, some filming on their phones, some whispering excitedly to each other. One elderly man muttered, "Never thought I'd see the HOA go down like this." The humor of it nearly made me laugh aloud, but the fear and adrenaline kept me from fully relaxing. Karen struggled a little, but my husband's firm grip and calm presence made resistance futile. She was handcuffed, sputtering protests that fell flat in the open air. I could see the other board members exchanging panicked glances, suddenly realizing that their own little empire of rules and authority was crumbling. One by one, my husband moved down the line. There was Mrs. Patterson, who tried to explain that she was just enforcing community morale. My husband didn't flinch. "Participation in unlawful acts does not excuse you from responsibility," he said simply, and she froze. It was almost like a domino effect, each board member realizing too late that the law doesn't bend for HOA volunteers. By now, the street was crowded with neighbors, some stepping closer to watch, others whispering incredulously. The scene was chaotic but controlled. I clutched Lily and took a deep breath, realizing how surreal it was to watch grown adults panic because their self-imposed rules were being exposed. Some of them even tried to argue with my husband, but their words were weak, flustered, and entirely ineffective. Karen, in particular, was a study in desperation. Her voice had gone from smug and commanding to frantic and pleading. "This isn't fair. You can't just," she shouted, but my husband's calm, unwavering authority drowned out her protests. Every word she uttered seemed more pathetic than the last. I couldn't help but notice the absurdity of it all. These people who spent hours obsessing over mailbox colors, lawn heights, and sandbox safety were now being led away in handcuffs, humiliated and exposed. I whispered to Lily, trying to keep the mood light despite everything. "See, sometimes adults are sillier than kids." She giggled nervously, leaning into me. Even as the arrests continued, the suspense didn't fade. there were still lingering questions. Would anyone else try to interfere? Would Karen attempt some last-minute stunt? The tension in the air was electric, and every second seemed stretched to its limit. Finally, as the last of the board members was handcuffed and led toward my husband's patrol car, the street began to relax slightly. Karen glared at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief, muttering something about community betrayal and unjust authority. I just shook my head, unable to fully process the surreal scene that had unfolded in front of our home. I held Lily tight and exhaled slowly. The immediate threat was gone, but the neighborhood would never be the same. The absurdity, the fear, the drama, and the justice, all of it had collided in our quiet suburban street. And in that moment, I realized that while the battle was won, the story was far from over. This was only the beginning of the chaos, and the consequences of that day were just starting to ripple through our neighborhood. By the time the last of the HOA board members was led to the patrol car, a small crowd had gathered on the street. Some neighbors clapped quietly, others whispered excitedly, and a few were filming everything on their phones. The surreal mix of justice and absurdity hit me all at once. My daughter, Lily, clutched my hand, still wide-eyed but now starting to feel the relief I felt. The air was thick with tension and curiosity. People were murmuring about what they had just witnessed, an actual arrest over HOA overreach. I caught snippets of conversations. Did she really try to take the kid? I knew she was crazy. Those rules were ridiculous anyway. The mixture of shock, humor, and vindication made me almost laugh out loud, but I stayed grounded, keeping a protective arm around Lily. Then, as if on cue, the news vans arrived. Cameras rolled, reporters shouted questions, and suddenly the chaos of our quiet suburban street had turned into a media frenzy. One reporter asked, "Can you confirm that the HOA board was arrested for attempting to remove a child from her home?" My husband, always professional, nodded calmly and replied, "Yes, that is correct. They were violating the law, and the arrests were necessary." Karen's panic returned, but this time it was magnified by the cameras and the growing crowd. She tried to maintain some semblance of dignity, but it was clearly futile. Every statement she made came out as a frantic jumble of half-baked defenses. "We were just enforcing community safety codes," she shouted, her voice cracking under the pressure. It's about the rules." The absurdity of it all was almost comedic. The other board members attempted to interject, some pointing fingers at each other, others insisting they were innocent. One muttered, "I was only following orders," while another tried to look as if nothing had happened. My husband didn't even blink. The calm authority he maintained made Karen's and the others' panic look even more ridiculous. Neighbors started whispering and laughing quietly among themselves, sharing their own HOA horror stories. One woman said, "I've never seen anyone so obsessed with lawn gnomes," and a few others chuckled. Despite the tension, a strange sense of community pride began to emerge. We had all witnessed a real-life victory against absurd rules and petty power plays. I watched Lily, who was now beginning to understand that she was safe. "Mommy, they're gone," she said quietly. Her innocent voice cut through the chaos and reminded me why I had fought so hard. I knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Yes, baby, they're gone. You're safe now." Even as the arrests were processed, the suspense lingered. What consequences would the HOA board face? Would Karen attempt to come back with some legal loophole? The uncertainty kept the adrenaline alive. I noticed a few neighbors whispering, taking mental notes of the confrontation. Social media was already buzzing, and I realized that this story wasn't staying private. The world outside our street was about to see exactly how far HOA overreach could go. As my husband guided the officers and the board members toward the police vehicles, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. These people had thought they could dictate our lives, our property, and even our child's safety. They had miscalculated. The law, common sense, and courage had all aligned to set things right. I looked at the other neighbors, who now seemed more relaxed but still buzzing with excitement. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled at us, offering congratulations. The mix of relief, humor, and awe was palpable. I realized that this event would be talked about for months, if not years, in our little suburban community. And yet, even with Karen and the board in custody, a small part of me remained wary. Social media chatter hinted at potential backlash, legal appeals, and attempts to regain some semblance of power. The tension wasn't completely gone, but for the first time that week, I allowed myself to breathe. Lily was safe, my husband had handled everything with authority and skill, and the neighborhood had witnessed the downfall of petty tyranny. As I held Lily and watched my husband coordinate with the officers, I realized that this day, this chaotic and surreal day, had changed everything. Our quiet suburban life would never be the same, but in the best possible way. The absurdity, the drama, and the suspense had given way to a new sense of safety, justice, and even humor. I whispered to Lily, "We won, baby, you're safe and we're okay." She smiled, the kind of smile that made all the fear, all the tension, and all the chaos worth it. By the next morning, our quiet suburban street had become the center of a storm we hadn't asked for. News crews were already circling, social media posts were exploding, and our phones hadn't stopped buzzing since the arrests. The story had gone viral almost instantly. HOA Karen tries to take a child, entire board arrested. I scrolled through comments with a mix of disbelief and amusement. People were outraged, incredulous, and some were downright laughing at Karen's self-proclaimed authority. Memes popped up within hours. One showed her in a superhero cape labeled HOA Enforcer of Justice. Another replaced her clipboard with handcuffs and the caption, "Some rules you just can't enforce." I couldn't help but chuckle, even though the situation had been terrifying just days ago. Lily, of course, was blissfully unaware of the social media storm. She just wanted to play with her tricycle, and for a moment, I let myself enjoy that small sense of normalcy. But the tension lingered in the back of my mind. Karen and the remaining board members were not the type to quietly accept defeat. It didn't take long for Karen to try to defend herself publicly. She posted long-winded statements about community safety and overreach by law enforcement, but her words only made her look more ridiculous. One of her attempts even claimed, with total seriousness, that she had acted in the interest of neighborhood harmony. People online tore it apart, pointing out the obvious absurdity of her claim. Her arguments, meant to justify her actions, only amplified the humor and outrage surrounding the story. Meanwhile, my husband and I watched, half horrified and half entertained. He shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe she thought anyone would buy that." I laughed nervously, realizing just how absurd the situation had become. Neighbors stopped by, some to check on us, others just to share their amazement. Every conversation seemed to include the line, "Did you really see her try to drag Lily?" Despite the humor, the suspense lingered. Karen's desperation was palpable. The board members who had managed to avoid arrest tried to distance themselves, but the community wasn't buying it. Rumors swirled about lawsuits, appeals, and petty retaliations. Every time I opened my phone, I half expected another HOA stunt to pop up. Then came the emails. Karen sent long, frantic messages to the neighborhood listserv, attempting to rally supporters. My husband, ever calm, suggested ignoring them, but I couldn't help reading them out loud to Lily. The messages were full of legal jargon, threats about bylaws, and endless references to community standards. I read one line and laughed. I didn't know bylaws came with a clause about abducting children. Lily giggled at that, completely missing the gravity of the moment. The tension escalated when a few board members hinted they might try to return with legal loopholes or a lawyer to reclaim their authority. I felt my stomach twist. Would they really attempt something so brazen after being publicly humiliated and arrested? My husband reassured me. They can try, but they won't succeed. The law is clear, and the public eye is on them now. Even as the story dominated local news and social media, I realized something remarkable. The community was united against the overreach. Neighbors came forward with stories of previous petty HOA enforcement, mailboxes, hedges, garden gnomes, and suddenly, it felt like Karen's actions were the tipping point. The absurdity and drama of her overreach had exposed the flaws in the entire HOA system. Despite the tension, humor remained a lifeline. I watched videos online of neighbors reenacting the arrests, sometimes using garden tools as props or turning Karen's infamous smirk into exaggerated cartoons. Even my husband had to shake his head, laughing quietly at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. By the end of the week, the story had fully saturated the community and the internet. Karen's desperate attempts to defend herself had failed spectacularly. The arrests, the viral posts, the public outrage, it all left her looking foolish, powerless, and isolated. The suspense remained, yes, because there were still minor HOA members lurking, but the tide had clearly turned. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, I whispered, "We did it, baby. We got through this, and no one can mess with us now." She yawned, snuggling into her blanket, completely unaware of the chaos that had surrounded her. And I realized, with a mix of relief and lingering tension, that our suburban street would never be quiet in the same way again. Karen's antics had shown the extremes of power gone wrong, and the community, and the internet, would not let it be forgotten. The courtroom was packed. I hadn't expected it, but apparently our little suburban saga had captured the attention of half the town. News crews lined the back, neighbors filled the benches, and Karen, flustered, and red-faced, sat at the front with the rest of the HOA board. Their self-importance had completely evaporated. I held Lily's hand, feeling her small fingers clutch mine tightly. She was tired but curious, peeking around at the strange scene. "Mommy, why are all these people here?" she asked quietly. I smiled softly, stroking her hair. "They're just here to see the rules work properly," I said, keeping it simple. The judge entered, and a hush fell over the room. He was a stern-looking man with an air of no-nonsense authority. Karen straightened in her seat, attempting to look confident, but I could see the tremble in her hands. She glanced at her fellow board members, some of whom avoided eye contact entirely. The hearing began with my husband presenting the case. Calmly, methodically, he laid out the facts. Karen had attempted to remove a child from her own home, the board members had supported her actions, and all had ignored multiple warnings and common sense. The evidence was overwhelming: letters, videos, witness statements, even neighbors' accounts. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the board members with raised eyebrows that spoke louder than any words. Karen tried to speak at one point, arguing about bylaws and community safety codes. The judge, without looking up from his notes, cut her off. "This court does not recognize HOA bylaws as a substitute for the law. You have overstepped your authority." His words hit the room like a gavel of truth. I felt a surge of relief. Lily squeezed my hand, sensing my calm, and I whispered, "It's almost over, baby, you're safe." The judge moved through the proceedings swiftly. Each board member who had been complicit was held accountable, with fines, probation, and orders to undergo community service related to child safety and neighborhood regulations. Karen, of course, received the harshest consequences. The judge lectured her on overreach, delusions of authority, and the importance of common sense in suburban life. Every time he spoke, I could see her confidence crumble further. By the time the verdict was delivered, the tension in the room had been replaced by a strange mix of satisfaction and humor. Karen and the board members looked utterly defeated. Their faces, once so smug, now reflected disbelief and shame. I couldn't help but smirk, remembering how confidently she had marched onto our lawn thinking she could enforce imaginary rules. Outside the courtroom, neighbors and reporters surrounded us. I hugged my husband, grateful for his calm authority and bravery. Lily ran ahead, waving at people who had come to support us. One neighbor whispered, "I can't believe this actually happened. I've never laughed and gasped at the same time." I chuckled, realizing that the story had become both a cautionary tale and a source of humor for our entire community. Karen tried one last appeal, posting on social media, claiming the board had been unfairly targeted. The response was swift, merciless, and viral. Memes, hashtags, and videos dissected every ridiculous claim she made. Even the neighbors who hadn't witnessed the original chaos could now join in on the laughter and outrage. As the dust settled, life began to return to normal, but nothing was quite the same. Our street was quieter in some ways, safer in others, and the HOA board, at least the ones left in power, seemed to have learned the limits of their authority, though I suspected Karen would find another way to test them in the future. I watched Lily play in the yard, her tricycle racing around like it owned the world. I realized how precious these moments were, how fragile peace and safety could be, and how absurdly hilarious the events of the past week had become. It was a strange mix of relief, humor, and lingering adrenaline. Finally, as the sun set over our little suburban street, I sat on the porch with my husband, holding Lily between us. "We did it," I whispered. "We actually got through it." He smiled, rubbing my back gently. "And the neighborhood knows it too. Hopefully, this will be a lesson for a long time." I looked at Lily, her cheeks flushed from excitement and play. "You're safe now, baby, always." She hugged us both, a perfect reminder of what had been at stake. And though the absurdity of the entire situation would live on in memes, news stories, and neighborhood gossip, one thing was clear. Justice had been served, the board had been humbled, and our little family had survived an ordeal that no one could have predicted. The street was peaceful again, but the story would never be forgot, and honestly, I wouldn't want it to be. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.